Today, I'm happy to introduce Adam Andrzejewski, CEO of OpenTheBooks.com, an organization devoted to exposing excessive spending by our government. Now, using big data and forensic auditing techniques, his investigations have led to subpoenas, indictments, convictions, congressional legislation, and White House policy changes as well. For example, since February, Open the Books has partnered with Real Clear Politics to publish a daily government Waste of the Day report. As a senior contributor to Forbes, Adam has 14 million views on 175 published investigations. Every day they shine a white-hot spotlight on waste, fraud, corruption, taxpayer abuse across all levels of federal, state, and local government. And they are not slowing down. Why? Because the public wants to cut waste. In fact, I think all of us do. To fight government waste, they produce examples that people can see and touch and feel. Their role at Open the Books is to expose that bloated spending so you can follow the money, so you can see how your elected officials are putting your tax dollars to use. And then it's up to you to hold them accountable. It's your money. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me introduce to you Adam Andrzejewski.
Thank you. Paul Anthony, thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to you and Joanne for your hospitality over the last 24 hours. I really appreciate it. Members and leaders of Balance for Chautauqua, thank you for this opportunity to share our mission and vision. I know of no better example in government size, scope, and power, the depth of the swamp, than New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo. This is going to be a good day. I guess that's why they call him St. Andrew. You guys are already laughing at the remarks. When last summer, when the first phase of the pandemic had passed, Governor Cuomo issued his ethics policy very quietly about pay to play. And he was against it. And he said, not one single dollar influences any official action. And if a New York politician, if a dollar would influence their actions, that politician should not be in government service. So at OpenTheBooks.com, during the fall of last year, we fact-checked Governor Cuomo. And our investigation published at the New York Post. And here's what we found. First off, pay to play is when a company gives campaign cash and expects to receive a state contract. And that would be highly unethical. The governor's right. So we took 6 years worth of the New York State checkbook. We matched it up with Governor Cuomo's campaign donor disclosures. And we found that he solicited 347 state vendors who reaped $6.2 million in state payments. And they gave us $6.2 million in campaign cash, and they reaped $7 billion in state payments. And it was such an egregious fact pattern that the New York Post had to make up a new phrase to describe Cuomo's activity. They said it's quid pro Cuomo. In God we trust. I guess Andrew Cuomo we must audit. I have one objective here today, and that's to shine that white-hot spotlight on government waste, fraud, corruption, and taxpayer abuse. And as many of you know, I'm from Illinois, and it is the Super Bowl of corruption. Our reputation for corruption is international. At one point, 4 out of our last 9 governors at a recent point had served time in the federal penitentiary. In 2013, 2 of our governors were actually in the federal pen at the same time, and it was one from each party. Democrat Rod Blagojevich, he tried to sell Barack Obama's Senate seat, and Republican George Ryan. And one of our most famous residents is Rahm Emanuel. And I remember when Rahm left the Obama administration and had come to Chicago in 2011 to run for mayor. And Rahm Emanuel was running on a good government platform. Rahm Emanuel, when he was running, promised to end the historic culture of corruption in City Hall. Rahm Emanuel promised to end pay to play. And so in 2015, when Rahm was running for re-election, I got a call from the Emmy award-winning journalist, John Stossel, who has been at Fox News Channel. And Stossel said, Adam, can you fact check Rahm Emanuel's campaign pledge? And I said, yes, we can. We took 6 years worth of city checkbook. We matched it up with Rahm Emanuel's campaign donor disclosures, and we found that 600 city vendors gave Rahm Emanuel $7 million in campaign donations, and those vendors had reaped $2 billion in city payments. And that's when we knew that pay to play was still fully legal in the state of Illinois. So despite the corruptions in New York and in Illinois, I am hopeful and optimistic about our future. Because in the last 5,000 years of human history, you and I have been given a great gift. In America, the citizen is sovereign. We recognize that our rights come from God. They don't come from government. We actually instituted a government to secure our rights. And our founders knew that the people needed the tools to be able to hold that government accountable. And so our founders knew that knowledge was power. They gave us the tool of transparency to hold government accountable. And it's in our United States Constitution. It's Article 1, Section 9, and it states that a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. And today it's the internet age. It's the age of big data. There's a clear interpretation. It's to post every dime online in real time. Open the books. My name is Andrzejewski, and I founded openthebooks.com on the clear vision to capture and post online every dime taxed and spent at every level of government across the entire country. And it's a lot of work. Last year, our auditors, we filed 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests on nearly every single substantial public body in this entire country. That had never been done before. We successfully captured $6 trillion of federal, state, and local spending. We're the world's largest private database of public sector expenditures. And here's what our database is comprised of. Nearly all federal spending back through the year 2001. State checkbooks, 49 out of 50 states. We're only missing California. And last year, we filed a lawsuit to begin the practice of enforcing transparency law in the Golden State. We sued the state comptroller, Betty Yee, to start the process of forcing open the $320 billion of California line-by-line state expenditures. In our database, for the first time ever, you can look up the public employees' salary and pension records of virtually every single public employee at every level of government, federal, state, and local, even in your own backyard across the entire country. We not only open the books, we audit the books, and the audits make national news. For example, just 10 days ago, the Biden White House, they released their White House payroll. And within 2 hours, we had oversight up at Forbes on what was in the Biden White House payroll. We beat every single national news organization to that oversight. We beat Politico in Washington, D.C. by 51 minutes, and they actually adopted our frame. Here was our title at Forbes. Biden's White House payroll is the most expensive in American history. 51 minutes later, Politico called it bloated in their headline. And it is. For the first time, the White House payroll has over 500 employees. There's actually 568 employees on the Biden White House payroll. It is crowded in the West Wing. For the first time, the White House payroll rivals $50 million of annual spend. And to put that in perspective, that's $10 million more than in the first year of the Trump administration. His, on an inflation-adjusted basis, was only $40 million. Biden's White House payroll has 190 employees more than Trump in his first year, and he's got 80 more than what Biden had in his first year. And it's going up. Biden has forecasted that he wants 55 czars. He's only filled 21 of the positions so far. White House Fellowship Program, it's back. And on June 5th, they announced 21 White House fellows, and none of them appear in the White House payroll disclosures. The First Lady's payroll, it's back at large numbers. So working for Jill Biden are 12 staffers, including 2 social secretaries. You and I collectively pay $250,000 a year for Jill Biden's 2 social secretaries. So to the extent the White House payroll is a leading indicator of the president's commitment to grow government, to grow the size, scope, and power of government, taxpayers should be troubled. At openthebooks.com, we take a tranche of federal data and we give it oversight. And we've just recently updated our oversight report that's entitled Mapping the Swamp, a Study of the Administrative State. So what most people want to know is out of 4.3 million federal employees, who made the most money last year? I hope you saw our story in January, published at Forbes, where we answered the question. And it's not Nancy Pelosi, if you were thinking that. She only makes $223,500. It's not Kamala Harris, the vice president, only makes $235,000. It's not the employee with the most responsibility, the rare 4-star generals in the United States military, whose command encompasses millions of civilians and soldiers. They only make a little less than $270,000 a year. It's not the president of the United States. Joe Biden only makes $400,000 a year. Who here in the room saw the report? Anybody? The number one most highly compensated federal employee out of 4.3 million. Yes, it's a big story. Sean Hannity mentions this without citing us every night on Fox News. Anthony Fauci, the good doctor, made $434,000 last year. And I wish he was a little bit better on the science. First, it was no masks, then 1 mask, then 2 masks, masks forever. And now we know from his emails that he didn't even believe a mask that you and I were buying at the local drugstore would prevent the coronavirus. And Dr. Anthony Fauci is a very good example as to what's going on in the federal bureaucracy. Here's some of the findings from our report. The federal bureaucracy is very expensive. It's $1 million a minute. It's $500 million a day. It's $15 billion per month. We found a new minimum wage in the federal bureaucracy and the executive agencies. The average salary now in 78 large federal agencies exceeds $100,000, 6 figures. But it's not only about the lucrative salaries, it's also about the paid time off. Incredibly, if you hit your 3-year anniversary as a federal bureaucrat, you get 44 days of paid time off. It's 11 holidays, 13 sick days, and 20 vacation days. And that's nearly 9 full weeks of paid time off every single year. And this isn't France. We estimate that small perk every year costs the American taxpayers, you and I, $25 billion. And it's not only about the lucrative salaries and the paid time off, but also about the performance bonuses. We know that last year, 1 million federal employees received a performance bonus for $1.1 billion. And that mystifies a lot of people. I don't think government's running that well. How can 1 million federal workers get a performance bonus? So we dug a little deeper. And this is actually true. We found that 99.6% of all federal employees are rated fully successful. And that's actually impossible. The advertised purity of Ivory soap is only 99.4%. So it's not only about the lucrative salaries, the 44 days of paid time off, the performance bonuses, the federal bureaucracy. We also have a transparency problem. You see, we just got the 2020 payroll through the door, and I haven't had time to analyze it, but I asked my team of auditors, I said, how many salaries this year are redacted from the responsive record? And they told me the number, it's 347,000 that the Biden administration redacted from the executive payroll. There's 1.4 million employees in the executive agencies, and 347,000 of them are redacted. In the last year of the Obama administration, we were upset because 3,500 names were redacted from the responsive record. And today it's 347,000. And we estimate that that means $30 billion is still hidden in the swamp. We have a lot of work to do. Now, at the federal level, we know that there are 500,000 six-figure public employees. And here's what I want you to know. We can't complain about Washington, D.C. unless we have good government where we live, where we have network, and where we can get things done. The swamp at the federal level is dwarfed by the state and local swamp. There are 1.6 million six-figure public employees at the state and local level. I hope you saw a report this spring. In March, in my column at Forbes, we broke the news that the LA County lifeguards can make up to $392,000. Life's a beach when you're an LA County lifeguard. And we put Baywatch on Paywatch. We found 82 California lifeguards made between $200,000 and $392,000 last year, and 7 of them made more than $300,000. We found 31 lifeguards made between $50,000 and $131,000 last year on overtime alone. We found a single lifeguard made in a 5-year period $630,000 on overtime alone. And the union wasn't done negotiating that lifeguard contract. They have an outstanding retirement plan. It's 30 years and out on up to 80% of your pay as early as age 50. Then you got the tree trimmers in Chicago who can lop off 6 figures, $107,000 a year. You've got the city manager in red states like Texas. In the border community down in El Paso, I think it's El Paso, the average income is $20,000. It's a poor town. In the last 3 years, the city council has conferred $1.9 million of cash compensation on the city manager position. And that is a moral outrage. Here in the state of New York, many people wonder why New York is in trouble. And at openthebooks.com, we know the answer. There are 300,000 six-figure public employees. The heavy boot of government in New York to pay their salaries, perks, and pension is a lot heavier than in states like Florida. Florida has more people than the state of New York. Florida has 50,000 six-figure public employees. Texas has more people than the state of New York. Texas has 80,000 six-figure public employees. In the city of New York City, we've been giving oversight to the payroll for the last 5 years. And here's what we found. In 2016, there was 76,000 six-figure public employees. 4 years later, under Mayor Bill de Blasio, there's 114,000 six-figure public employees in the city of New York, went up in 4 years by 50%. You could be a general laborer in New York City and make $210,000. You could be an electrician and make $250,000, and a plumber at $300,000 in New York City. There are 4 deputy mayors on de Blasio's staff that make more than $240,000. For crying out loud, in the New York City public schools, you can be a custodian, a janitor, and out-earn the principals. The custodians earn up to $256,000 a year, and the average principal in the New York public schools makes $154,000. My favorite story. So look, if you're in the New York public schools with the custodians and janitors making that kind of bread, there's no trash in the hallways. I can't say the same about the streets in the city of New York. In 2017, de Blasio, he was going to get tough on rats. De Blasio called the press conference and declared war on rats. And he put $32 million of taxpayer money behind that program. 2 years later, in 2019, the New York Times called me. They said, can we do a co-investigation? Can you map every single citizen complaint for rats on the 311 line in the city? And I said, of course, yes, we can. And we did. We mapped 130,000 cases over a 10-year period of citizens calling in a rat sighting on New York public streets. We found in the data that de Blasio's War on Rats campaign, the number of rat sightings increased by 40%. The rats were winning. They had outfoxed the New York City bureaucrats. There's 329,000 people that work for the city of New York, and the rats were winning. On the day that de Blasio declared for president of the United States, the title of the co-investigation at the New York Times, on the homepage of the Times' website, the title read, "The rats are taking over New York City." Probably not the press that de Blasio wanted on that special day for him, as he declared for president. At all levels, we have a lot of work to do in this country. At openthebooks.com, our data can be used to hold elected officials accountable for their promises. So we had noticed in the summer of 2019, we had actually noticed in 2017 when London Breed was running for mayor of San Francisco that she ran on a promise to clean up the streets of San Francisco. San Francisco, I don't have to tell you, they have a homeless problem, about 8,000 homeless people, and the homeless people were defecating on city streets. So she ran on a promise to clean up the streets. So 2 years later, in 2019, we downloaded the citizen calls to the 311 line of human waste in the public way. And we mapped 140,000 cases over a 9-year period on our interactive mapping platform. And yes, we did use brown pins. Let me tell you, there's a brownout in the Bay Area. That map, the whole city was brown. It trended on national Twitter. It made international news. You see, in 2014, there was 10,000 calls of human waste in the public way on the city's 311 line. And the next year, there was 13,000. In 2015, there was 18,000. In 2016, there was 20,000. By 2018, there was 28,000 calls in that year of human waste in the public way. In 2019, the calls spiked to 31,000. And that is a human health catastrophe. So I ask you, what government program is running well? Could it be the federal government's response to the coronavirus? In March of 2020, on a bipartisan basis, everybody voted against this bill. Everybody voted for the bill. Nobody voted against it. The CARES Act. This was the initial $2.3 trillion bill to provide coronavirus aid to a country who the politicians, they had basically, they wanted to flatten the curve, and so they had shut things down. And this was the aid bill for all of us. So there was a program within the CARES Act called the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. These were dollars meant to serve the mom and pop businesses on Main Street. And on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, our organization at openthebooks.com was showcased because we mapped every single one of those PPP loans, the mega loans, between $1 million and $10 million. And here's what we found. We found that the Hollywood elites put their paws in the PPP money. So you had Robert Redford's Sundance Institute. They've got net assets, gross assets of $50 million. They don't need taxpayer help. And they took $3 million of round one PPP money. Kanye West, he claims he's a billionaire. He's got a very expensive sneaker company. They sell their sneakers for hundreds of dollars. And Kanye West's sneaker company took $2.4 million of round one PPP money. You've got the director of The Godfather, probably the greatest movie ever made, Francis Ford Coppola. Francis Ford Coppola has 2 private companies and took round one PPP money, $8.5 million. And all of that is dumb, but this is dumber. Hamilton, one of the most successful Broadway shows, playing in multiple venues. Hamilton, the New York Times just exposed, applied for up to $50 million worth of COVID aid relief, and they've already received $30 million for the Broadway musical Hamilton. And this one's even dumber. Round one PPP money, up to $419 million flowed to companies owned by the CCP. This was PPP for the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Domestically owned companies right here, many of them in the defense industry, reaped between $200 million and $419 million of our money before Congress closed the loophole. What government program is running well? Look, the CARES Act, that was the politicians' first opportunity to help us on coronavirus. They rushed it through. Maybe they got a little better as time continued. About a year later, this time on a partisan basis, Congress passed the American Rescue Act, $1.9 trillion. Biden's president, every Democrat votes for it, every Republican votes against it. Let's give it some oversight. As a part of that bill, $350 billion bailed out the states and localities, about 30,000 towns. Every town where you live received a congressional bailout. I'll walk you through a couple. The top 50 richest places across America, according to Bloomberg, received, we found, $100 million worth of congressional bailout. Atherton, and we mapped it all. You can come to our website, you can look up your hometown, and you can see it. Atherton, California, the richest place in the country. Average income of $525,000. They got $1.4 million. Scarsdale, New York, the richest place on the East Coast where Beyonce and Jay-Z have a home. They got $1.4 million. The Hamptons, $8 million. All of New York fled to Greenwich. Greenwich got $21 million out of the American Rescue Act. Key West down in Florida, $10.1 million. Zip code 90210, Beverly Hills, California, $6.3 million. Santa Clara County, the county of Silicon Valley, got $400 million out of that bill. And again, that's dumb, but this is dumber. Even red states like Utah, surprise, $1.7 billion budget surplus, and Congress bailed them out for $1.7 billion. The purple state of Colorado, they had a $3.8 billion budget surplus, and Congress in the American Rescue Act just bailed them out for $4 billion. And surprise, surprise, California comes through with a $75 billion budget surplus. And out of the American Rescue Act, they get $26 billion on top of that with our money. Let's go to K through 12 schools in the American Rescue Act. Okay, during the pandemic year of 2020, Congress bailed out K through 12 schools to the tune of $80 billion. It was so much money they couldn't even spend $10 billion of it. Now the shots are being distributed. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel on the pandemic. And the American Rescue Act comes through in March, and in one fell swoop, along party lines, Congress provides $128 billion for K through 12 schools. And now we know 95% of it won't even be spent to the year 2022 through 2028. Government had a chance during COVID to show us just how good they are, how they can help solve our problems. No one had greater pain in the country than the 44 million Americans that were tossed out of a job at the height of the pandemic. And Congress provided $860 billion worth of unemployment. If government has a role, everybody in this room can agree. The role of government is to help people who can't help themselves, people that have real needs, experiencing real pain. And today we know that half the money was stolen. Criminals, con artists, crime syndicates have stolen up to $400 billion. It's the largest public crime spree in the history of the country. So you tell me, what government unit is running well? You know, I don't think government has ever run well. I mean, think about the good US Senator, the Democrat from Wisconsin, William Proxmire. Between 1975 and 1988, Proxmire gave 168 of his Golden Fleece Awards. See, Proxmire was disgusted when he got to Washington, D.C., and saw the abject waste and what he called nonsensical spending. And so he came up with this award, which the Washington Post said that in his era was the most robust political device. So Proxmire would hand out these awards. In his obituary at the New York Post, in his obituary at the New York Times, they highlighted a couple of these awards. Here's one of them. In inflation-adjusted dollars today, about $250,000 was doled out by the FAA, who got his Golden Fleece Award for a study of 432 flight attendants, how they arrange their knees when they sit, and they measured the length of their buttocks. About $400,000 in today's inflation-adjusted dollars, Proxmire found that the National Institute of Mental Health gave a $400,000 grant to a bunch of researchers to go down to Peru, to a brothel, to study the activity. And the researchers said they had to make repeated visits back to the brothel in the interest of accuracy. So who today should get a Golden Fleece Award? And without any question, as I stand here in front of you today, it has to be the 23 newly elected Republican freshman members of Congress that just helped tip the Republican Congress toward earmarks. You'll remember that back in March, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, to cement her power as Speaker, wanted to be able to bring back earmarks after a 10-year ban, to be able to dole out member pet projects to get votes on Joe Biden's spending bills to make them bipartisan. And Republicans, about a week after that, they held a secret vote. And 102 to 84, they voted to join Nancy Pelosi to bring back earmarks. We now know that 23 newly elected Republican freshmen who ran as fiscal conservatives voted to bring back earmarks, proposed earmarks, and Nancy Pelosi in June in the infrastructure bill has rewarded those 23 congressional freshmen with $370 million worth of earmarks. You've got the former Kansas treasurer, Jake LaTurner. He's got 11 earmarks approved by Pelosi for $20 million. You and I are going to be spending $3 million to buy buses in Topeka, Kansas. You've got Nancy Mace in South Carolina. Nancy Mace wanted $1 billion earmark as a freshman, the hubris to propose $1 billion earmark, and Pelosi only greenlit 20 million of it. Here's another one of Nancy Mace's earmarks that she proposed. $35 million for the Shishi Airport in the wealthy Hilton Head. Now, over the years at openthebooks.com, we've lit up the fact the federal government has provided $20 million for the Shishi Airport at Martha's Vineyard. I think people can pay their own way to land their planes, and they don't need our money. But Nancy Pelosi not even Nancy Pelosi put in Mace's Hilton Head Airport earmark. We also know that those freshmen were coached by Republican leadership. So you have the dean of the House, self-described dean of the House. He's been there since 1973. His name's Don Young. He's the at-large member of Congress out of Alaska. And who is Don Young? You remember the Bridge to Nowhere. It was responsible with U.S. Senator Tom Coburn highlighting that bridge, about a $100 million earmark from mainland Alaska to an island that served less than 100 people. And Don Young still argues that bridge was not waste and should have been built. Don Young wants you and I to spend $19 million on a new fire station in Kodiak, Alaska. The Missouri congressman who heads up the Republican in the minority on the Committee of House Infrastructure and Transportation, he's got $30 million of earmarks greenlit in Nancy Pelosi's bill. So look, earmarks are the currency of corruption in Congress. Earmarks are there to be able to legally bribe a member of Congress for their vote. So the first fleece has to go to those 23 House Republicans. Look, I think NASA should get a fleece award. NASA doled out $1 million to prepare the nation's religions for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. Cornell University. Cornell received $1 million for a study where it hurts the most to be stung by a bee. Health and Human Services, they deserve a fleece award. They gave $1.4 million for sex education for California prostitutes who could probably teach the class. And the International Aid Agency certainly needs a fleece. They doubled down on the California prostitution grant. They gave $2.1 million for sex education for prostitutes in Ethiopia. So what government program is running well? Could it be farm subsidies? We did an oversight report of farm subsidies in America's urban areas where there are no farms. We found tens of millions of dollars flowing into New York City, Chicago, and the Washington, D.C. Beltway. My favorite example, it comes from Chicago. I guess the waste examples are always better in Illinois. The founder of the Nation of Islam, Reverend Minister Louis Farragut, is a farmer in a 17-year period, mailed to his home in Hyde Park, Chicago. He collected $317,000 worth of farm subsidies. What government program is running well? Could it be the federal funding of America's Ivy League colleges? We did an oversight report of the 8 schools of the Ivy League over a 6-year period, and they collected $42 billion worth of taxpayer subsidies, special tax breaks, and federal direct payments on contracts and grants. We took a look at the Ivy League collectively at $42 billion versus federal payments to states, state governments. And if the Ivy League were a state during that 6-year period, they would out-earn on federal direct payments 16 state governments. We took a look at the $24 billion over that 6-year period collected on contracts and grants by the Ivy League schools versus what they collected from undergraduate student tuition at $22 billion. Today, the Ivy League is more federal contractor than they are educator. And we also found a lot of waste within the Ivy League grants. I talked about the bee study at Cornell. Here's one from Columbia, nearly $6 million to create fake voicemails from 50 years in the future after America has been decimated by climate change. And you could have used your voice memo application on your smartphone. You don't need $6 million, and Columbia should pay the money back. We now know our projection as of 2 weeks ago for the close of the 2021 fiscal year at the Ivy League, we project with the stock market gains, they'll collectively have an endowment of $170 billion. Over the next 27 years, we project the Ivy League colleges will have $1 trillion endowment. So join me. The Ivy Leagues can't make the argument that they need taxpayer help. The Ivy League should lighten the load on the American taxpayer. I just want to close with a story from our honorary chairman, the late Dr. Tom Coburn. So when Coburn was getting ready to leave the Senate, he told the following story. You see, Coburn was a citizen legislator. He liked nothing more than to deliver babies back in his small town in Oklahoma. And as a doctor, Coburn delivered 4,000 babies in his small town. And Coburn gave us all a warning as he left the Senate. And it's called Coburn's 3-minute warning. And he compared it to when he was delivering babies. He said, on the law, a large number out of 4,000 deliveries, sometimes you would know you had a problem when the baby's heartbeat, which was normally 130 to 140 beats per minute, would fall to 50 or 60 beats a minute. Coburn said, at that moment, you had to make a decision. You could go for the forceps, you could go for the vacuum extractor, you could wheel the mother out of labor and delivery, put her up on the table, cut a hole in her belly and do a C-section. But the fact was you had to make a decision to save the life of the mother, to save the life of the baby. And Coburn said, now in America, this is our 3-minute moment. We, you and I, we need to make a decision. We need to join arms. We need to fight on hard facts. And when we fight, we win. Let's lock arms. Let's fight these battles together. I'm inviting you to join us, to join the transparency revolution. Thank you.